And I'm just going to pretend that there's a whole bunch of you there. So you were both here this morning, so I don't need to do much of an introduction, but I'm still Paul, and I'm still here to talk to you about NVivo 14 on the Mac. We're doing the next steps workshop this time, again, an hour and a half scheduled. And I just wanted to I guess, point out or mention again that next steps doesn't mean it's more advanced stuff necessarily. It's information that people over the years have come back to me and said, okay, so I've got the coding done. I know how to do that. I'm comfortable with what I've told NVivo about my data. What else can I do with the software? And so that's the type of stuff that we're going to be covering today. I will be sending you a link to this recording and also to the slides and to the research guide that I mentioned probably a couple of times. And if you've got any questions, obviously just unmute yourself and ask, or pop yourself into the chat box, and I'll try and keep an eye on that as well. The list is shorter for what we cover in the afternoon session. I'm going to talk a little bit about data privacy, how to password protect your projects. And while we're in that area, we'll take a look at some of the other settings that are available to you. The biggest one that you'll want to at least know about is the stop words list, which I alluded to in the morning session. Then we'll spend some time looking at cases and case classifications. Also in the morning session, the introductory session, I was talking about how NVivo can understand your demographic data. So things that differentiate each of the people in your research project. The big obvious ones being things like gender, age, education level, but it's really any way that you care to differentiate your subjects. Each of the subjects NVivo refers to or calls them cases. So that's what a case is, and then case classifications are the different types of people. So again, we'll get into that. Once we've taken a look at that, then I'll be leveraging that kind of information to do some more advanced queries. Again, with the idea of trying to get data back out of NVivo. And then I think we'll definitely have time to take a look at importing a data set or a survey, so tabular type data, which is likely to contain both quantitative and qualitative or open-ended questions. And NVivo is able to do some interesting things with data in that format, so we'll take a look at that. And as part of that, there's some auto coding capabilities available within NVivo where, again, we talked about it this morning, NVivo can understand the structure of a particular piece of data. So in that example, we'll take a look at a Word document and learn how to break it up by speaker. I can't recall right off the top of my head if we could also tell it about, as we saw earlier, the different types of questions. But we'll take a look at that and see what we can do. Same disclaimer as this morning, I'm still not an expert in different research methodologies. So for that, I'll refer you once again to Sage Research Methods. You can find a link both in this slide that you'll receive and also out on my research guide, where you'll receive a link to that later. So the first bullet point there was data privacy, and why might you want to know or care about data privacy? And there's a couple of obvious reasons. The most obvious is chances are you're dealing with words in your project that were spoken to you in confidence. Whoever you spoke to, whether or not they even assigned an agreement to that, but you can well imagine that those people would have expected you to keep whatever they say to you in confidence. You know, you talk to them for your research project, not for public consumption. So it's a good idea to make sure that you do whatever you can to ensure that that data doesn't just get released to the general public. But the other reason is possibly more procedural or even legal. If you accept any funding from any research agency, chances are they've got a policy that says you've got to keep your data confidential. And so, for instance, the Tri-Council policy statement, going on 5 years now, says it's the ethical duty of confidentiality includes obligations, going to move a window here, obligations to protect information from unauthorized access, use, disclosure, modification, loss, or theft. So again, you've got to kind of do whatever you can to secure the data. And NVivo allows you to password protect a project. So that's what we're going to take a look at here. I've got the same project, the sample project that we left at the end of this morning's session. So even with my turtle example there, but I'm going to show you where to find the spot where you can and possibly should password protect your project. There are actually two places that you can tweak the settings within NVivo. One relates to the specific project that you're in. And then the second place that we take a look talks about the software as a whole. So for this instance, when we're creating a password, it's specific to this project, not to any future projects that you begin with. So do keep that in mind. You could have a different password for every project. You can use the same one. It's NVivo doesn't care. It's up to you. But what I hope you can see is all the way in the upper left-hand top menu bar, so close to where the Apple icon appears, it says NVivo, File, Edit, Home, and some of those are the same choices that you have here in kind of the software menu bar. But the one that you don't have down there is the File option. And that's what we need to hit to get to the project-specific properties. So when I choose File, and go down about 2/3 of the way, there's a link here that says project properties. And once again, these properties are specific to this exact project. And the link that we want, or the choice that we want, is that middle one that says passwords. And note that there are two boxes or two areas that we could actually fill in there. One says password for read-write access to the project. And then the one below that is password for read-only access to the project. And it tells you a little bit down here about what the difference is. Read-write password. So in a project with a read-write password, the ability to make changes to the project is restricted by that password, is what it's trying to say. And then in a read-only, you can only open, copy, and kind of look around in it. So I find that kind of a bad explanation. I was just reading it for the first time there. When you are thinking of a password, you're probably thinking of this read-write type of password. Whatever we type in here will give you full access to the project. You can delete stuff, you can re-code stuff, you can work on it just as you would with any other, as you expect. The read-only type of password simply means you can get in there and poke around, but you could not delete anything. You couldn't add anything to the project. And you might use that for an instance when you're trying to just share the work that you've done with your supervisor or a colleague, and you didn't, it might be a matter of trust, but it's just, you want to allow them to look at your project, but not change it. So you might decide to have a separate, and it does need to be a different password down here. A couple of things also to note, though. Nowhere on here does it say how secure the password needs to be. It doesn't say it's got to be 14 characters long with 2 punctuation marks and a capital letter. In fact, I just typed in 1, 2, 3, and it will accept that as a password. Don't use that as your password. Do make it something somewhat secure. That's the whole point of the password. It's not supposed to be something that could be guessed or that your cat could accidentally type by walking on your keyboard. However, a warning, you will also not find anywhere within the software an opportunity to recover your password or reset your password. So it all lives within the project. There's no web-based saving of it. If you forget or lose your password, you're not going to be able to get back into your project. There's no way to recover it. I did talk to the folks at NVivo a number of years ago, and they say they could try, like you would have to send them your project and they would try to crack your password, but they couldn't guarantee it. And even if they did, then you're kind of defeating the whole point of the password anyway by just sending your information out, and then they'd have to return it non-password protected. So do write it down or put it in a password management tool. Know that, get it in some format that you know you won't forget it. You can leave yourself a hint, but don't put the password in the hint. So as soon as I hit OK, it's not like kicking me out of the project, but I do just want to show you how it ends up working. So I'm going to close this project, file. I want to close right there. Probably going to get some dialogues. I do need to save it because I did make a change, but the next time I come into the project, which if I say file, open project, should have chosen recent. In fact, I'm going to do that. So file, open recent, that one. It's supposed to, and it does prompt me, which type of password. I only have the read write, and if I mistype it, it won't let me in. I can request the hint and then remind myself, oh, right, that's what it is. So, it works like a password should, but you do need to know where to find that. So once again, all the way to the top of the menu, file, project properties, and then the password area. So while we're here in the project properties box, the other thing that I wanted to draw your attention to is right here on the general tab. So the first one that you hit when you come in, this is where you can access the stop words list that I talked about earlier this morning. So when we ran the keyword frequency query, I told you that many words do not appear in that frequency query, and then we added, I think it was Henry, to the list, and this is where that list lives. So if and when you ever want to take a look at the list or modify it kind of manually, this is where you can do so. So the list is just an alphabetical list here, and the only word that's on here that isn't in there by default is, I think, the one we added today, which is Henry. But just to take a look here, you can see all the other words that are more or less invisible to NVivo. So you're never in your word frequency going to see the word whom or whose or before. If for some reason you wanted to see those words, all you have to do is delete it from the existing stop words list. So there may be instances where either you inadvertently add a word or you add a word and then realize, okay, yeah, you do want to see it. So that's the type of thing that you might need to get yourself back here and see what those words are and then modify them. By the same token, if you tell NVivo that the words that you are analyzing, so you've brought in a transcript and perhaps it's in French, you can tell NVivo that the text content language, the language of the text you're analyzing, is a different language, and you will get a different stop words list. So same idea, but the words in another language. So I could even leave this as French, and it wouldn't impact the rest of my project in the least until I needed to look at some words or word frequency, and then because I'm working on the French one, then the English stop words would be visible and kind of crowd or pollute my results there. So that's really the only place it's going to come into play. So just kind of keep that in mind. So I'll keep it at English. The English United States and English United Kingdom are actually the same list. I'm 99% sure. I actually did a comparison a number of years ago and just had a file comparison tool, and there were no British spellings on this list. It may have changed. I haven't checked in version 14, but just something to be aware of. It doesn't really matter which ones of those you choose. So yeah, so I'll just kind of leave it at the default there. So that's probably all you really need to pay attention to in the project properties area. There are a couple of other tabs that you could change certain things, but I've never really had to. So just know that, that there are a couple of other features there. And then the other thing that you might take a look at is settings as a whole. So we were under File and Project Properties, But if you go to the NVivo tab, again, all the way at the top, and then choose settings, or if you're a keyboard jockey, it's the same settings, which is octothorpe, comma. That'll take you into the settings for the software as a whole. And there are, again, probably not a ton of things that you'll ever really change, but if you needed to, you could say, you know what, I don't really want to see that welcome to NVivo window anymore. You could force it every time you launched to say who is using the software. So if you're sharing the machine with somebody, might be something to do. This context spread proximity is something that you might play around with. I can't remember where it always comes into play, but in the previous example where I'd done a search for, I think it was turtles, there were, I think, 5 words on either side of that keyword. And I believe that if we choose something like this, and again, I'd have to do some more experimentation to see if it applies across the board or only in the transcript, that kind of thing. But you can tell it that, in fact, you do want more information on either side. It's still not necessarily as granular as you might care for, but something like this would certainly get you more of the content than what we had on that previous thing. So again, something else that you might play with and see if it gives you some additional results. The notifications, it's probably a good idea to keep that deletion confirmation. I don't think, again, there's really much else that you'll play with in here. There's your content language for new projects. So if you are, in fact, always bringing in Chinese or French, you could tell NVivo, you know what, don't make me change that every time. Here's where it's going to be set. And I guess I have to close that first. So I think that's it for those settings. I've got some screenshots that will remind you where to go to get that. And for the rest of this, in fact, I'm almost done with the slides themselves, and we're just going to spend the time in the software. So a very similar slide to the one I had this morning, which includes a reminder to always remind yourself of why you're sitting down to use this particular piece of software. What is it? What's the research question that you're trying to answer? And if you can remember that, hopefully you can, that will help guide your use of NVivo. So don't let it say, here's an interesting looking button, I wonder what I can learn from that. You say, I need to figure out how many people talked about this particular concept. Let's go learn that. So don't let NVivo drive the research. So you'll receive these slides. I'm just going to talk about this and then do it. But I told you the next thing we'll jump into are these ideas of cases and case classifications. Cases are the individual, think of them as people. They don't have to be, but that's the easiest way to, I think, conceptualize the idea. So every person who's involved in your research project, every person you interviewed, every person who filled out a survey for you, each of those people is a case. Each of those people also have a number of attributes. It could just be one attribute, but it could be a dozen or more. It's however much data you want to collect about those people, however much they're willing to give you. But most importantly, how much do you need to answer your research question? If you don't have any knowledge of or care about an individual's occupation, don't include that, right? Don't ask them for that information if it's not relevant for the research that you're doing. So keep it targeted, but know that you could have any number of attributes that you are paying attention to. This morning in the introductory session, we took a look at information in the data area and also in the coding area. For this section, we're now moving down a little bit under cases and case classifications. I also mentioned that this sample data set is a little bit more complicated than most that you'll deal with. So in this case, they have 3 separate groupings. They're all people. No, they're not all people. 2 of them are people, and one of them is a place. In your case, you are probably only going to have one case classification. It's probably going to be people. You may call them interviewees, they may be teachers, it doesn't really matter what you call them, but they will be most likely people. And so in this case, if we take a look at a listing of the people, these are also represented up here under cases and people. So there are the interview participants, so Barbara, Betty, Charles, Daniel, etc. And then there also happen to be these survey respondents, and they all start with DE 001 to DE, I think there's like 89, 100 of them. And we'll see those again kind of represented here. I'm switching back and forth between the case classifications and the cases. I always found those two things kind of confusing, case classification and cases, because almost always it was like a one-to-one relationship. You'd have persons as the classification and then the actual persons here. So that's likely to be the case for your project if you're even using this information. And I forgot to even mention, you don't have to incorporate this kind of information. This is something NVivo can do. It does a pretty good job of it. But if it's not important for you, don't try to work with cases and case classifications. It may not be relevant for your research question. So again, keep that in mind. I spend a fair bit of time here talking about it, but it's not going to be pertinent for everybody. As far as the people, I can go one level further on underneath the case classifications area and see what are the variables, what is the demographic data that we have for each of these people. And so Barbara falls in the 40-year-old age bucket. She has nothing to do with commercial fishing. She lives in Betty. She completed some undergraduate college, or all of it. She identifies as female. She's lived for 2 generations down east, et cetera, et cetera. NVivo is not magic. It doesn't just know this information. The researchers had to tell NVivo this information. So you do have to collect it from your participants. One of the kind of neat features is you don't have to do it at the beginning of your project. If you've already got a project on the go and you realize suddenly, oh man, it would be really interesting to be able to slice and dice my data based on different variables, you can add this information at any point, either at the beginning, the middle, or the very end of your project. And NVivo will still be able to leverage this kind of information. So the next step is for me to show you how this information, I guess, exists in the world, and then how to get it into NVivo. But note that we've got, about 11 items, it looks like, 11 pieces of information about each of our interview participants. And in order for me to not even further complicate this sample project, what I'd like to do is start a brand new project, bring in some data, and then show you how to incorporate this demographic data into the cases and case classifications. So to do that, I'm going to go to File, New Project, and this would have been analogous to when I first fired up NVivo this morning. There was kind of a splash screen, and it said either start with the sample project or begin a new project. So this is how that will work. I may have to save, no, don't even have to save the other stuff. Here's a note, and I think I talked about that this morning. We are in version 14 here, and it's giving us a warning that projects created in this version cannot be opened in previous versions. So whatever I build here, it's an NVivo 14 project. I can't open it in 11 or any earlier version if I had access to that. I do have to give it a title. What are we, still Wednesday, but it's Wednesday afternoon now. Wednesday PM, it's going to live initially in my documents folder. You can put it most anywhere. My recommendation is that you do put it on your hard drive as opposed to a cloud location. Just a reminder, if you're coming into this session later, you can store your NVivo projects on a cloud drive such as Google Drive or Dropbox or OneDrive, but don't work on the project file while it's in that location. There's a real possibility of data corruption if you do that. So keep it on your hard drive while you're working on it, move it later if you want to. Title, can leave it as untitled. I'm not sure why it's not letting me click out of here. Tags, there we go, and to tab into it. You could leave it as untitled, or it would probably make more sense to call it roughly the same thing, but they can be different. Wouldn't hurt to spend a moment and give a description of this project, both for yourself, for your supervisor, for any co-workers who are helping you with the project. Just give it a few, a sentence or two describing what's going on. I'm not going to bother, but there you go. There's a feature, I don't know why I'm not able to click here. Autosave, the idea there is probably a good idea, but I recall from the Windows version that it's a little bit more explicit. If I choose autosave, if I was even able to, I believe that removes the option to use Control-Z to undo work that you've done. There are other ways that you can undo some work, but you would not be able to automatically use a keyboard shortcut, or if there even was kind of that whole back arrow option there. So keep that in mind. And in just a moment, here's our new project. It's going to be blank, basically. So I'm going to skip the tour, get this full screen. And so version 14 attempts to be quite helpful. And every time we go into a new area for the first time, it's going to give us a little summary of what this is. And so we are landing in the files area. And if I move my zoom controls out of the way, if I can even, there we go. There's a little close button down there towards the bottom. And now that goes away. But I just want to kind of reiterate that this is a completely blank project. So there's nothing in files. If I'm over here in the upper left-hand corner, there are no codes. Here it tells us about codes. And again, later, or in the not too distant future, we're going to be both under case classifications and cases. But I'll close those off. All right, so first step, though, is that I want to have, even though I closed it, I'm coming back in again, and it's telling me what's happening here. So again, I kind of find that a little bit annoying. But first step is for me to bring in some actual files. And you may recall that I like to use my right mouse click to get stuff done within NVivo, and I'm going to be importing some documents. And it's just going to allow me to browse through my hard drive, and I want these interviews. So I have 7 or 8 Word documents, and probably has to get them out of the cloud and then into here. So it'll take just a second. But then what I will be doing is telling NVivo what characteristics do each of the people represented in these documents have. So while it's importing, I'm just going to go back over here and show you what the next step will be. So let's see, I want my workshops. And this Excel sheet, volunteering classification sheet person, is what I'm about to introduce to NVivo. And this is the way you will want your classification sheet to look, more or less. This one's quite simple. I've got a column, and it works best. NVivo is able to work with it most easily if your first column is the people that you are talking about. It doesn't have to be their name. It could be a code. You remember the DE 001, DE 100 for the survey results, but it should match the document or data that you're attempting to automatically match. So in this case, my classification sheet has a column which is the names of the people who are represented in these documents. So you'll see Anna and Bernadette and Frederick, etc. These are the variables. This is the demographic data that I know about each of people. What age group are they in? What country? What is their current paid work, education, volunteer work, and gender? So pretty simple, pretty straightforward. You want to have some header that describes the data, but then it's just a straight data table there. And so I have to close this in order for it to, for NVivo to grab it. It'll complain if I have it open. So I'm just going to close that. And it's kind of a two-step process. And so the very first step, again, all I've done in this project so far is import these Word documents, which are just interview files. And there's not currently anything under cases or under case classifications. So the very first thing that I want to do is tell NVivo that I'm going to be treating these documents as people, not the documents themselves, but they represent or are represented by people one way or the other. So in the files area, I've highlighted all of them. And once again, you could do this at least 2 or 3 different ways, but I'm going to right click and say, create as cases. And all that's going to do, like nothing even happens on my screen here, but now under cases, I have something for each of these people. And in fact, all it is at this point is a pointer back to the file in question. So when I double click on Anna, it is the same as me double clicking on Anna at this point. I may have just opened up all of them. Nope, didn't. And I'm not sure why Phoebe opened, but in this case, I've just got 2 tabs. One of them is Anna's file and the other is Anna's file, but in a slightly different format. And the second one is how I got there through the cases. Just a quick note, if you've got good eyes, the documents have a particular icon next to them. So it's just like a little page. Under cases, like a case, a briefcase, I guess is what they're trying to show there. So that's a visual clue that you've got some slightly different data there, or data in a different format. Now, we have not yet told NVivo about the characteristics of these people. We've just kind of set up a placeholder for them. So the next step is to go to case classifications, close my helpful memo, and I'm going to import a classification sheet. Let me mention that these steps, I don't find them terribly intuitive. It's not the sort of thing that you would do often. I do it more often than most, probably because I do these workshops and I help other people, but you might do this 1 out of every 3 projects that you ever work on. You may only do it 1 time in your life. So don't worry about the actual steps that I'm doing here. I just want to show you how it kind of all comes together. But know that when the time comes for you to incorporate this, if you can't remember the steps, it's okay. There are ways to relearn it, or hit me up and I'll help you do it. But in this case, I've gone to case classification and I'm going to import a classification sheet. I'm going to browse to the location of that spreadsheet. And in this case, I think I had opened up the Excel a moment ago, but for this specific type of interaction, NVivo on the Mac insists upon a CSV. So I would have had to save that specifically as a CSV file format. So when I choose that, it's asking, oh, what are you trying to do with this? I'm going to put it as a case classification. Do I want to create a new classification or import into an existing one? I don't have any existing ones, so I do need to create a new one. It's not obvious at this point, but I kind of need to tell it here. I think if I hit next, it would say, oh, you haven't created one. So I have to actually type it in at this point. I'm going to not do that just to confirm for myself. Probably leave these choices as the default. What it's saying, if we stop to read and consider, it says create new attributes if they do not exist. So things like gender, age, and they don't exist because we don't have anything in the project yet. Update the classification of existing files. Well, we don't have any existing cases, which is what we're dealing with. Well, we do, but there are no classifications there yet. So that's unchecked. I think possibly as soon as I type something in, that may check itself. And then replace attributes if they already appear, but again, there's nothing to replace. So my first question to myself is, if I don't type anything and hit next, yep. So I do have to give it a name. So in this case, these are going to be interviewees. It doesn't care what you call them. It's got to be something that means something to you, though. So it could have been students, it could have been people, participants, whatever you want to call it. These happen to be interviewees in my case. And now when I hit next, it's going to say create new cases if they do not exist. And in fact, that is what I want to do. If they do exist, it ought to just add that information to them. So let's see if that happens. And it says, if in this release, you can't change the options in this step. So I don't know why they show them, but when I say import now, what I hope happens is that for interviewees, we actually have this data tied to them. And it is showing correctly here in the case classifications, but the proof in the pudding is if under cases, it now also includes that information. And I think, I can't remember right off the top of my head how I can prove that those variables are in fact associated with each of my cases. I believe they are at this point, but the only place I can kind of verify that is by seeing that Anna is also represented here under case classifications and is here under cases. And I think it's all tied together. So the way to prove that would be I'd got to have some coding done in the files. So if I take a look at Anna's file here, and let me just grab some text, and I'm going to say, I'm going to code this to a new code, and I'll call it, what are we doing? Netball, sports, because yoga is also mentioned in there. And so what I've done is just create a new code for sports, and I've added some text to it. And let me do the same in somebody else's interview. And I'm doing this just so I can see the difference between those users. And so Frederick ought to show up as, I believe, a male. And if he's got anything in here to do with sports, we'll say that this is it. And again there, and codes. And so now I've coded two different chunks of text from two different interviews into, lost my train of thought there, into a particular node or code called sports. And what I want to do now, and a better example would have been had I done this from the sample data set, but if I go to explore and query and crosstab query, once again, don't worry if you don't think you'll remember exactly what type of query I did. Just again, remember it can be done and you'll get there. But if I choose a crosstab query, I get a kind of an annoying choice by NVivo, in that it's not like any of the other wizards that they are dealing with. Usually kind of in the middle of the screen, you have something to work with. But even when I get rid of the menu choice there, it's all the way over on the right-hand side where I'll be building this particular query. And what it's asking me to do here is run a query, but I have to build it first. It's suggesting that I add some codes to this box. I could go to codes and drag them all the way across my screen and drop them into codes, but that's kind of annoying. So I'm going to suggest you hit the plus key and then browse to the codes. In this case, I've just got the one. So I'm saying something to do with sports, show me everything that there is in here. But then down here towards the bottom is where you start to get to touch that classifying information. So under classification, I've just got the interviewees and then the attributes that are available. I know I happen to choose two different files, one of whom I believe was a female, one of whom I believe was a male. And so I'm going to say to NVivo, show me the words I found in that code, sports, but show those codes against the attribute of gender. So that's what's about to happen here. And I'll run the query, sorry, the next little one down, run the query, and it did in fact do as I intended. So what it's trying to show us here is the code, sports, gender female in this column, gender male in this column. And it did find one reference in each of them. I had grabbed one from Anna, one from Frederick. So it did in fact do what I wanted it to do. To actually see the words that the male spoke, all I have to do is double click on that cell. It'll open it up. It again points back to Frederick and shows the words that I found. From this view here, it can't tell me anything significant about the words. It's just telling me that there are differences and giving me the opportunity to take a look at those differences. I could further segment by age group. So I can only ever do two attributes, and it'll be maybe obvious, or if I switch back to the other data set, it'll be very obvious. It can get very convoluted even with two variables, so you can understand how it would be very difficult to make sense of three. But what happened is, it says up here in kind of a pale yellow, the query parameters have changed. Please rerun the query. So I'll do that. And now it's the same data. So it's still just sports. Here are the females, here are the males, but now I've got looks like three different age groupings. And so I can now tell that that female was in the 20 to 29-year-old age group. The male was in the 30 to 39-year-old age group. So if I had more data, it would really start to fill in there. It's also useful to take a look at the results tab. So we were on the query tab over here to the right, but if I click on results, it will tell me a little bit more about what in fact are these numbers. And so the default is that it's telling me the number of cases that were coded. So the number of people who show up in sports area talking about sports according to these demographic variables. You may decide to change that to coding references. In my case, in this example, it's exactly the same because I have one code, one chunk of text in each of the files. But if Anna had 7 chunks of text that related to sports, that number would be represented if I choose the second option of coding references. So do know that there's a difference over here and that the number would change depending on what you choose. The other two things that you might want to take a look at are these heat maps. The colors don't mean anything, but they can help draw your eye to bigger or differences in numbers. In this case, there are only ones and zeros, but it's highlighting where the ones appear and suggesting that you don't pay attention to the zeros. If I had a huge spreadsheet here, that might be a way for me to kind of explore and say, oh, well, interesting. There's a whole bunch of numbers over here. Let me double click on that, get to the results and see what's going on there. You might also play with this transpose button. All it does is flip the data. We've still got our sports column now as opposed to a row, so a column. Here's our females, and it may present the data in an easier way for you to read it. Again, if it's a bigger results page, might be worth kind of playing with that transpose button. And then the final thing that you might do from here is if you right click, you could actually get to some of those same options under results, but you may decide to share or export the results to any number of different options, but probably spreadsheet is what you would choose. And then you would be able to open this data in Excel and visualize it, perhaps do something else with it, move it over to SPSS if it was a whole bunch of data. So kind of some interesting things that you could do with that. Let me stop, grab a drink, and ask if you have any questions. And I'm going to redo this information all the way over in the big sample data set, just to show you what a more fulsome result might look like. And it'll actually allow me to run a couple of different types of queries as well, since there's coding over there. But do let me know if you do have any questions, please.
I have a question. Does the Mac version have a option like Windows that reminds of every 15 minutes to save the project instead of autosave?
Yeah, good question. And I can't remember, especially for version 14. We'll probably find out, especially when I'm in my next version, the next project, if it does pop up. But I don't remember seeing that explicitly in the options as I was poking around in there a few minutes ago, as I do in the Windows. So that may be something that is in fact different, in which case you probably do want to make a habit of saving the work that you've done. A reminder or new info, if this is new to you on the Mac, the little red icon that appears on every single Mac program, if there's a black dot in it, that means there is some unsaved work. And so if you ever notice that there's a black dot in that red dot, then that tells you that you haven't saved some work. So I should go to File and Save. And as soon as I do that, that black dot should disappear. And it does. And now that's a visual clue or cue that you're good to go. And by the same token, if I were simply to say File and Close Project, right now it'll accept that. But I do know that the Mac version of NVivo would pop up an alert saying, hey, you haven't saved this. It won't just shut it. So you are a little bit safe that way. The only way you might lose some work is if you hadn't saved and your system crashed or something else catastrophic happened. But does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. And interestingly, it actually does say I must have some saves or changes. And I see. Nope. I'm surprised it is making me do that because I did just save it. So maybe it had something else that it was doing in the background. But it has dropped me back off to the sample data set. So again, the interviews, all the codes that were in here. And so when I do the same type of query here, the matrix coding query, you're going to see a more fulsome results set, and you'll see why kind of choosing those color codes might be more useful. And then I'll also run a different type of query or two just to see what else you could get out of it. But sorry, crosstab is what I've been doing. So if I go back to queries and crosstab, same thing. I get this great big waste of space in the middle. I can't even kind of move things around. But if I close that, I don't even have to close that necessarily. But here I'm going to hit the plus key. I'm going to pick a whole bunch of nodes or codes rather, and just to make sure that it really fills in. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And in this case, the classification would be person. And once again, let's start with the big obvious one of gender. So I'm asking NVivo to look at all of these codes and find me content, but show me the males versus the females. And if you had 3 genders or some unknowns or undecideds, you could show that as well. It's not a binary. So in this case, still a relatively easy screen to read. I can still say, show cell, no, what do I want? The heat map. So it's really just showing the big numbers down there. If I choose the one that includes lots of different colors, yeah, it's still not terribly useful here, but it does show some differences. Once again, I'll remind you, it's not that red is bad and green is good. It's just a way of differentiating your numbers. But when I start to add yet another attribute, so are you involved in commercial fishing, and rerun the query? It's not even that big a thing. Let me find something that is really big. I'm not sure off the top of my head which one will be. It's a little bigger. So you can see that it starts to run right. And so that's where I may want to go to the results tab, or click and choose transpose, and then it makes it a little bit easier to see there. So to my eye, actually, this red is a little bit jarring. So I'd maybe do something like this, and that tells me that the darker greens are where most of the action is. But what I would do with this data is I'd be saying something like, okay, so for the concept of infrastructure, here are the females in the top half and the males in the bottom half. If I just wanted to kind of compare the two of them, I would only choose gender, but I would double click on this option and I would get survey respondents where females said the pace of development is too fast, and it's reminding me of that up here. And then I could do the same thing for the males. And once again, NVivo can't really tell me anything other than showing me these two different pieces of information. And then I would read them and I'd say, yeah, they're pretty much talking about the same thing. Or I'd say, oh, isn't it interesting the females are all talking about this one thing and the males about something else. So it's a pretty nifty way to be able to slice and dice your data. Other types of queries that you can run, and here I told you that previous example was the only one where it throws everything all the way to the right. Here's a more typical example of the query wizard. This one is a matrix, so it's going to look pretty similar to what we just did, but the idea here, and they'll kind of explain it down here, it's an attempt at finding patterns. So you wouldn't necessarily use this if you were looking for something specific, but you could use something like this just to get a feel for what's happening in your data. One of the really obvious ways that you could do something would be to find overlap. So I'm just going to grab, I'll just grab these four. And so in this case, because it's so close, I am going to just drag them over, but I'm going to actually do a code. I'm going to look at the same ones basically and just show you what that looks like. And then I'll show you another thing that you could do. So same idea. We could look at some cell shading. This time we get I think a slightly nicer white blue, but what you're looking at is any overlap between those codes. So kind of the thing that goes through the middle, 45, 37, 35, 297, that's where real estate overlaps with real estate, and it will be the highest number. But any of these other ones should be an example of where whatever this is, expand that. So policy management overlapping with community change. So this would be any text where that occurs, or infrastructure and community change. And once again, I can double click on the cell and actually get to that content. And if I really wanted to verify that, I would be able to take a look at the coding stripes. Easiest way is to say all, but that's a little bit convoluted here. So if I said selected items, I should be able to confirm that community change and, was it infrastructure? Can't remember. Do in fact both appear here, and there they are. So infrastructure and community change. And that's what's also represented here. So it's just a different way of kind of verifying that. But if we did leave it at all coding stripes, that might be yet another way to discover, oh, isn't that interesting? There's some overlap here that I happen to code this text, and every time I found it, I put it in these 3 places instead of just the 2 places. So possibly of interest to you there. But the other thing that you could do with this matrix coding query, in fact, I'm just going to close these tabs and get back to that same one. So here's the query. If I delete the information from this columns box, the other type of thing that we could show there, and again, this would be possibly a more exploratory type of query, where it says select attribute values. And this time, rather than, if I get myself to the people again, so the persons, rather than picking all of the attributes, so all the males, all the females, in this case, this would be possibly more of a targeted attempt. So I could say, and I can pick them all up, but if I say, you know, I really just wanted to see the people who only had some high school. So don't show me a table that shows everything. I'm specifically looking for the people who only completed some high school and how they showed up in my codes, these 4 codes for community change, infrastructure, policy management, et cetera. And so I can run the query, and in this case, almost nothing. I did get 6 hits on the real estate one, and I think these are coming from the surveys. Yeah, so survey responses. So 6 somebodies who filled out the survey indicated that they only had some high school, and this is what they talked about that I coded as having to do with real estate. So once again, you could pick and choose. You could grab a couple of different attributes. It makes a lot more sense for it to be the related attributes. So again, I'd stick with the education level in this case, and say they had some high school or, I don't know, or completed high school. So either one of those, and then run the query, and I'd get some additional results. So there were more people who actually did complete high school, is what I learned from this. Questions about those types of queries, about how they touched the classifying data from the case classifications in the cases? It is possible to save either the results of this query, which would be more of a snapshot, or probably more useful is to save the criteria, which means take everything that I've built so far and tuck it away because I want to do something with it again later. Where that might be even more useful is if you took some time and went through and just picked some very specific things rather than looking through all the documents. It wouldn't be hard to recreate this right now. But for instance, if I save this criteria, this was a matrix code. It says, what do I want to call this? And I'm going to call this matrix looking at 4 nodes or 4 codes by high school education. Something along those lines. And then when I hit save criteria, and if I were to close everything that I've done so far, so I've got nothing up here, but down here in the lower left now is a folder called query criteria. And in fact, most of this is all the stuff that was already included in this sample data project. So again, I mentioned that it's a neat opportunity to see other types of queries that could be run, but somewhere on here, there it is. So the fact that it identifies me as created by, I also could have sorted I modified on, so here's today, but this matrix looking at 4 codes by high school education level, when I double click that, it brings it up. I can hit run query and get the results again. So again, the idea would be if you had something very specific that you always wanted to be rechecking or getting more information on, you could have this kind of in your pocket and rerun the query at any given point. So yeah, other examples. Here's an example of a coding query. So coding query here. I did not build this. This one I just grabbed from the list of other queries, but it's an example of seeing what is available to you, how you could run a query. And so what this says is that it's looking at items in selected folders. I know that because that's kind of highlighted as opposed to the default of files and externals. To see those folders, if I just hover my mouse over it, it shows me. It's looking at files, externals, memos, and then these specific places. And it's saying all of the following has to be true. It's got to be a case, a person, where the age group equals the value of 30 to 39 years old. So we're talking about a specific age group of people. And it has to be coded to any of these codes, not all of them, but any of them. And there are apparently 7 of them. If I hover my mouse over, doesn't show, but if I click, somewhere, so I can't even really tell. I do see that it says on this first one, due to natural something or others, but I can't, unfortunately, actually verify what other codes were chosen here. I would have expected that when I click that, it would have shown me the checkboxes, and maybe they are further in. There they are. So it does, in fact, show me 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So this appears to be all of the codes that are related to fishing industry decline. And I knew that I was looking for 7 because of that little number right there. But when I run this query, again, we should get the results. This one is slightly different. It's not the matrix or the crosstab. It's not cellular data. It's actually showing me the results here. So there isn't much, but this is everything from those specific items, those specific documents where somebody in that age group talked about one of these concepts. And again, you've got some little tabs here. You can poke around, and this is what they said. So the 2 last things that I wanted to share with you, I'll give you a chance to ask questions again in just a quick second, but bringing in survey data, which, as I mentioned, could contain both qualitative, so the open-ended, and the quantitative or the number type questions, and how NVivo deals with all that. And then I also want to show you the auto coding by the document structure, so knowing or telling NVivo who is doing the speaking. Questions, though, I just want to make sure I don't just steamroll over you. Do you have other questions about anything you've seen so far?
Okay, I'm okay. I'm following. So maybe later I'll go through and see how immediately I cannot get a lot of questions. I'm just following how the app is going. So later I'll sit down. When you send the slides, I'll sit down and study it for more. So for now, I'm just following how the explanation is going.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Good to know. Thank you. So the next thing that I want to show then is, so the survey type stuff. Where do I have that? So both as a CSV and as an Excel, this is the survey, the same survey data that's here in the sample data project, but I want to show you how it started, and then we'll bring it into the other NVivo project that I'll open up again and show how it kind of works. And so you'll recognize many of the data fields here. If I blow that up, row ID is just that, 1 through 100, I think it is 105 in this case. But we have column headers for survey respondent, and this was probably auto-generated by the survey software. Return date, probably not helpful to us, but it might be. Maybe you do need to track that kind of information. But then we got a number of questions. So this first one was an open-ended type of question. So the question was, the natural environment down east is, and it asked the user to type in some words to describe it. And you'll see most people just did a word or two, but some others had a sentence or possibly even more. Some people might be very verbose. And as we continue through this longer document, you'll start to also see what we now know of as classifying information. So in this case, when we asked, or when the survey asked the person to probably choose their township, it would have been a list of possible townships for this geographic region. Same thing for community. How many generations have lived down east? It was either 1, 2, 3, or more, or none. Same thing with the commercial fishing. It's either a true or false type thing. So you can see that there's both the classifying and the classifying, which is the quantifiable. I'm getting myself confused. The demographic data, and then also the open-ended type questions, which is what you would actually be coding. So you would be reading that and looking for examples of text that fit into one of those existing codes. I don't want to simply add the same file to this sample project. So I'm going to go back to my Wednesday PM file, which may or may not have a password. Nope, must have deleted it. Oh no, I put it on the sample project. And so what I'm going to do now, remember, we only currently have our interview files, but I'm going to bring in that data set. I think the Windows version might even call it survey, but we know it as a set because it's in tabular format, an Excel file. And when I browse to that same location, which is over here, I had both a CSV version and an Excel version. By the fact that it's only allowing me to pick the Excel version, that tells me that's the format it wants. So if you had exported and you only had an Excel version, you would need to open that and then save it back out to, sorry, if you had a CSV version, you'd have to open that, save it out to Excel for NVivo to be able to open it. But what it's going to do is give me a bit of a wizard, or an assistant. We're already on step 2. It's just a re-representation of the data. It does give you the opportunity to say whether or not that first row contains the field names. Ideally, it should. Most software that you use to collect data would do that. But it's this next step, so step 3, that you do want to take a little bit of attention, pay a little bit of attention to. And that is, NVivo usually gets this right, but where it says codable text here, so the natural environment down east is codable, as opposed to, actually it's not even that section, it's down here where it says analysis type is codable, as opposed to things like township, where it identifies it as classifying fields. Same thing for community, classifying fields, so the demographic type data. So those are the only 2 choices, but you do want to make sure that, especially for the codable text, it has successfully identified it as codable text, because if you don't, you can't change it later. You have to delete and re-import. If you don't correctly identify it, or if NVivo doesn't, as codable text, you're not going to be able to select the text and assign it to a particular code. So do take some time to make sure that NVivo has correctly identified the type of data that you're planning to work with here. Again, usually it does, the gender is classifying or demographic, but sometimes it doesn't, sometimes it misses. If you do have some data that you don't think you're going to bring in, like this return date, we can unselect the import field and not bother. Where is it going to put it? All this, it says that's all the information it needs. I guess it's actually not asking where it's going to put it, but it's noting the name of the file that we're bringing in as survey responses. I'm just going to say they are survey responses and import. And so I have a new file, and here it is. It's opened it up for me, and it's really hard to see on my screen, probably therefore on yours as well, but there is a slight color difference between the two types of data. So the classifying information like respondent ID number and township and community and how many generations, it's got a slightly darker background as opposed to the the codable fields where we could actually interact with the data. And the other thing you'll be able to try and tell is if I'm clicking on any of these classifying or demographic pieces of data, I can't actually select them. But if I come over here to one of the ones with the white background, I could select and deal with them. Now, NVivo allows me, it actually does this automatically in the Windows version, but for the Mac version, you've got one more step where, actually two more steps where you might want to kind of further segment this data set here. It has not yet recognized that I have these survey type people here. So far, it only knows about my cases and case classifications for the interviewees. And so there are two steps that we're going to take to auto code this data set and structure it or introduce the structure to NVivo such that it's going to recognize that there is a person called DE001 who has these following responses and these demographic characteristics. So very similar to that cellular data that I brought in for the interview people. We need to kind of tell NVivo that's what's happening here. So if I go back to files and choose the survey, right click on it and choose auto code data set. The only choice that's available to me here. I'm going to do this twice because the first one is code to codes for selected columns. And what it's telling me is that each of those codable columns, so where I asked for the natural environment down east is what, it's going to create an actual code for that question. It gets a little bit confusing when they get mixed in, or if they got mixed in with your more thematic codes, but I'll show you how that works, and I think you'll be okay with it. It's simply reminding me which columns they are, and I'll say next. And it is, in fact, going to put them in something called survey responses, but it is going to go under new codes and codes. I guess I could tell it to go somewhere else, but no, it's all under codes generally. So here's what's going to happen. So rather than me having to click in this little cell and try and select the text, it's working okay here. But working from this cellular view is not as easy as when I now go to codes and find the new area of survey respondents. And I want to see where everybody's talking about the water quality down east. All I have to do now is double click here, and I will have all of my responses in a single document. And I can just code from here and say, you know, I don't know how I would do these ones, but you know, I could maybe say positive or negative. That type of thing would be pretty simple to do from this point. But I find it a lot easier to work from, you know, the question as a document as opposed to trying to work through the column here. And it just ends up being a little bit more cumbersome to work with. So that was step one, which is pulling out the question type data. But step two is when I go back to files and once again, right click, auto code data set. I'm going to choose that second option, code to cases for each value in a column. And so again, when you remember that some of our columns had that kind of classifying or demographic data, that's what it's about to pull out here. And so I say next, choose the column that contains the case names, and that's row ID. So that's respondent here. It's showing me the structure of it. That's all great. Which columns? Sorry, I may have misstepped somewhere. So just going to back up really quick. Yes, case names, preview. Yeah, that's fine. Next. So I'm expecting something different here because these same columns are the questions, but I'm not seeing the either verification or opportunity to say that it's supposed to be picking up that quantifying data. So either it's smart enough that it's going to do that, but I'm finding this kind of confusing just now. So let's find out. The one thing that I do know that we need to check, and I don't know why it isn't by default, is, and in fact, this is the final verification, classify cases from classifying columns. So, I mean, that's the whole point of this second step, of this second run through the auto coding. So again, I'm not sure why it doesn't do that by default, but it's suggesting, do you want to create a new classification called survey responses, or should they go in with my existing interviewees? Your choice. In this case, I think it makes more sense to go to the new classification. And here is where verifying the attributes. So from which column is it pulling that data? So row ID, respondent, and again, township, community, generations down east, age, gender, etc. So this is the step that verifies that it's doing what I want it to. And in just a moment, when I look at case classifications, now for any one of those individuals, I have all of that same information. I actually goofed by choosing row ID. I should have chosen respondent. I can see that here, that it's just 1 through whatever, as opposed to the respondent identifier here. So I can possibly, no, can't even just undo that. Yeah, I did. So I just hit Control Z at this point to undo that last thing, the last step that I just ran. So I'm just going to do it really quick again here and choose the respondent this time. So there is what I had meant to grab, and because that corresponds to the actual data that is elsewhere. So this time it's the same thing. It's just calling each individual something different, and it makes more sense to tie it to that respondent ID. So now again, same data, but instead of under the number 1, it's actually DE001. So all of that information there. And once again, very much like the previous queries that I'd done, I could touch any of these pieces of classifying information as I look at any of the coding that I've done. So the other type of auto coding that's available here on the Mac is to identify different speakers. And so for that, I'm going to bring in one more type of file, and that's a focus group. So let's see if I can remember where I kept that. Yeah, here it is. So I've got a document that I'm not sure if this is the one that is perfectly formatted for me, but it ought to work regardless. And this is a document where there are different people speaking. So not just Anna, not just Bernadette. Give me a chance to rename it, and then it will open it. And here we have a good, 7 or 8 different people who are speaking. So there's a moderator, somebody named Gina, somebody named Gladys, et cetera, et cetera. But the fact that the document itself, as it was put together by you, by the researcher, or by the transcriptionist, perhaps, they have identified who is doing the speaking. This is going to give us the opportunity to tell NVivo, there are different speakers here. And thus, at some later point, we could find only the words that FFF, who is Natalie, spoke, right? I'm not going to do it, but by the same procedures that we've just done, if I had a classification sheet that had information about each of these people, I could and probably would also import that information. But for this purpose, I just want to show you how to tell NVivo about each of these different speakers. So I've right-clicked on the new document, the focus group, auto code this time by speaker. And what it's going to do is open the document and give me a chance to, actually, I just want to double check. Yeah, so this is where the Mac actually is slightly nicer than Windows. With Windows, I have to type the name or the designator for the speaker. But in this case, I can just double or triple click. I can't remember what I did. Double click on any given name. And as I go through here, it's going to start to look at whoever I've chosen and whatever text follows. And until, or as soon as I've chosen all the different speakers who appear, it'll kind of slice and dice that whole document that way. So I'm double clicking, doesn't matter in what order, but you can see that moderator is now here. AAA is all here, but as soon as I choose triple B, it's going to break that up. And then I know that there's another one called triple C and then triple D. And you can see that it starts to understand that there are a number of different speakers here. And you want to make sure that you get them all. Otherwise, you'll get kind of a mashup of who is doing what speaking. So I think this is everybody. There might be some G's. Oops. D. Yeah, so I guess I can go back to the top and look for my D's and E's. So actually, I'm not sure. Yeah, that's already there. And it didn't let me add it. The reason these ones are not being separated is because they don't, they're all on the same line, basically. So I think I've got them all at this point. And now it's saying, do I want to create new cases or a new classification rather, or do I want to stick them under interviewees? And so again, your choice. Why don't I do yet another new one, and I'll call these ones focus group people. And then as soon as I hit auto code, it's going to create a separate entry for each of the speakers under the case classification. So now I've got my survey respondents, my interviewees, and my focus group people. And if I just wanted to see what BBB was saying, there we go. And yet again, what I haven't done is actually added any attributes to this person, but I can. So I could then later figure out, you know, how is BBB different from AAA, and kind of go from there. But just a quick demo of showing how NVivo can understand that there are different speakers. What the Mac version cannot do, apparently, is we had seen some indication when I turned on coding stripes that NVivo could also understand the structure. So the fact that there's an entire question here, Q1, and I could, in the Windows version, actually code by the structure of the document as well. That is something that the Mac version can't do. So there's one other useful auto coding feature that the Windows version does offer. And with that whirlwind tour, that's everything that I wanted to show you. As always, I'm available for questions either now. If you do have some questions that you'd like to follow on, we can ask those, or hit me up when the questions do come to you and you're working with your own data. But I'm going to stop talking now, double check the chat really quick, and just let you know, or you let me know if there's anything else you want to chat about, or you can jet and look for links to the recording and stuff. Yeah,
to
go
me,
ahead.
Yeah, it's okay. Like, I would like to get the slides so that I'll take my time and go through. I think this thing needs a lot of practice.
Yep.
I need to practice. Yeah, practice. Then I think so I followed a lot. It's a good presentation, and when I get a slide, I'll take my time to keep practicing. If anything I
Sounds
don't
good.
understand,
Thanks.
I'll get in touch with you.
Okay.
Thank you.
How about you, D? Is it D or die? I should know.
D.
D. Okay.
Yeah, I'm
Any
doing good.
questions at this point? Okay.
I just
Great.
realized. Is this I'm not sure if I'm understanding